Vamos lá, do princípio. De onde nascem as histórias?
Os desejos e medos dos homens.
E para que existem?
Nos ajudarem a sobreviver.
Miguel Gomes' self-reflexive films Tabu and the Arabian Nights trilogy use modes of docufiction and intertextuality to represent the modern Portuguese national self and the historiography that has shaped this collective identity. Set in the context of post-2008 Portugal, Gomes represents the cold, sober austerity endured by the nation as one of the worst affected countries in the Eurozone as a result of the global financial collapse. Its subsequent submission to a bailout package with the Troika in 2011 caused alienation between Portuguese people and their government, and arguably a root cause for a modern national identity crisis. Gomes argues at the start of each Arabian Nights volume that the common people were sold out by their cowardice government with this deal. This has in turn undermined and torn apart the modernist products constituting Portugal's national identity, that is, their turn to democracy, Europeanisation, and their increased infrastructure to host international events as a modern city. The notion of modern crisis in Portugal is the foundation to start our discussion. In Gomes' films, not only are we looking at a reflection of the national self, opened up by the self-referential meanings created by crisis itself and its particularly modern attitude to politics, but we're invited to observe and question the act of looking itself. In other words, we're not just asking how our stories are told, but why, and what fantasies and anxieties arise as a result of this multi-layered self-reflexivity. Throughout his filmography, Gomes has used intertext as the building blocks to create his cinematic worlds. His extensive film knowledge as a cineast and film critic for Portuguese cinema journal Público enables him to draw sources from various genres, countries, and cultures. In Cristeva's notion of intertextuality, these diverse textual elements simultaneously carry their original meanings to the new filmic text, and new ones are created through their interconnection and contact with the viewer. Similarly, Gomes' films Tabu and Arabian Nights borrow both the titles and structures from the existing stories. The former is based on a 1931 ethnographic film, which carries its Western imperial ideologies and thoughts of exoticism into 21st century Portugal. It uses the binary structure of the original film, but inverses the chapters, offering both a reconstruction and deconstruction of the original source text. In Part 1, Gomes depicts modern Portugal as cold, depressing, and a place of non-encounter. Pilar, a middle-aged devoted Catholic woman, fails to make any meaningful connections in her life, as first, the exchange student whom she'd arranged to host stands her up at the airport, and secondly, her next-door neighbour Aurora falls into a deep depression and hysteria, which both worries and alienates her. However, substantial meaning is only created through its stark juxtaposition to Part 2, after Aurora, in her final moments of life, directs Pilar to a man named Ventura.
Vá lá espreitar, não vá o maroto meter-se outra vez em casa do Sr. Ventura.
Through his fragmented memories, Gomes loosely threads together an image of a wild and exotic colonial Africa, as defined by popular text in Western epistemology. These nostalgic tales of Africa, although problematic and historically misinformed, provide Pilar, Ventura, and the viewer an exciting escape from the mundaneness of modern life and austerity. More importantly though, that Gomes so overtly blends fact and fiction through Ventura's unreliable testimony heightens the level of artifice and creates distance. This is required for the viewer to adopt what Stephen Alan Carr terms an alienated gaze. This mode of looking is necessary for encounters with atrocity, such as the Holocaust, and in Gomes' case, colonialism and post-2008 austerity. It promotes critical engagement and awareness since it reveals the artifice of looking and ethically implicates the viewer in troubling ways. In this sense, while Gomes represents the fantasy of escaping crises through fiction, he also exposes the anxieties of the modern nation, whose identity is simultaneously constructed and deconstructed through contradictions.
E não nos deixeis cair em tentação, mas livrai-nos do mal.
Arguably leading to a sense of hyper-identity and devaluing the meaning of identity altogether.
O meu trabalho é realizar filmes. Gosto muito deste trabalho. Contudo, há momentos de angústia.
Gomes expresses the same dilemma of docufiction in Volume 1 of his Arabian Nights.
Pensei que podia fazer um bonito filme, cheio de histórias maravilhosas e sedutoras. Ao mesmo tempo, pensei que o filme podia acompanhar durante um ano a atual e miserável situação de Portugal.
His desire to stay completely factual is incompatible with his style of storytelling and leads to a creative block. Both him and his crew have their heads in the sand, literally and metaphorically. This is where Gomes eventually resorts to fiction and sets up a similar alienated gaze for the viewer, using the character of Scheherazade to narrate his tales of the economic crisis. Whilst giving a cinephilic nod to other representations of the financial crisis in Europe, Portugal's situation is represented as worse. The alienated gaze is created through the estrangement of the eclectic stories themselves rather than a reliance on intertexts, as in Tabu. Gomes creates a reality which is stranger than fiction, and fictional worlds that are inseparable from crises. In this sense, Arabian Nights becomes a self-referential whirlpool, where the fantasy of escape is both undesirable and impossible. Shahrazad's storytelling becomes more desperate as the trilogy goes on, as the stories are fewer in number and longer in duration. Where Volume 3 becomes more an introspective character study, rather than crises taking the forefront, we see Shahrazad desperate to escape the regimented structure set up by Gomesh's indexing. She eventually breaks the cycle by repeatedly going back to the story which focuses on leisure, rather than economic turmoil. Yet this doesn't signify progress, just helplessness and inescapability from one's past or present. Similarly, there is overlap in the binary opposition set out in Tabu, as colonial iconography is carried into present day, and imperialism informs Pilar's identity, which she constructs through cinema. This is best exemplified through the recurring musical leitmotif Tu serás mi baby by Lusoff, the Spanish-language cover of the Ronettes' 1963 hit Be My Baby. Gomes deliberately exposes the cracks of the film's structures to represent the fragility of Portugal's national identity. Baldeos argues these juxtapositions create lack and a film of saudade, a melancholic longing which is resonant with Lucifer cultures, originating from the Salazar regime. Moreover, there is a sense of buenos costumes, or gentle customs, a Salazarian principle used to excuse Portugal's part in colonialism. This myth was constructed to justify their barbaric actions by depicting a non-violent image of the nation as the front, masking the rippling anxieties and fragilities from within. This idea helps us to examine the notion of masculine anxiety, which is evident in Gomes's depiction of male characters, symbolising Portugal's patriarchal values haunted by and informed by the dictatorship. Gomes's first feature film, The Face You Deserve, focuses on Francisco, an unhappy, egotistical narcissist who faces a middle-aged crisis. He acts like a child, protecting his toy crocodile he got as a birthday gift more so than his partner. The vast majority of readings in Tabu focus on the crocodile as symbolising danger, but I would argue that Gomes creates his own semiotic system, whereby the crocodile symbolises Francisco's narcissism and toxic masculinity. In this sense, these traits which are attributed to Francisco are transferred to Ventura, who is closely linked with the crocodile. This offers a critique to Ventura's imperial narration of colonial history and undermines his stories altogether. Arabian Nights also critiques Portugal's gentle customs through the character of Paddleman in Volume 3. He has a godlike aura, having allegedly kept up a species with his special powers of procreation. His typically attractive complexion makes him irresistible in theory, and initially appeals to Shahrazad's. But when she attempts to know him deeper than surface level, she finds nothing, and rejects his advances.
O que acabaste de dizer é uma coisa bastante estúpida. E foi posta de uma forma ainda mais estúpida. Na verdade, creio que és bem burro. Embora não faça mal, porque há qualquer coisa de radioso em ti.
Her rejection deflates Paddleman's ego.
Adeus, filho do sol. Procria com outras.
But perhaps the biggest knock to patriarchy is in the outrageous and satirical first chapter of Volume 1, titled The Men with Hard-Ons. It is politically charged, criticising the incompetence of the Portuguese government as weak and Troika as an illegitimate power. In this meeting to renegotiate the debt collection, the representatives make a fool of themselves.
Mas são cortes progressivos. Uma medida equitativa. E boa, não é?
Privatizam a água, privatizam a luz, privatizam os correios, privatizam o caralho que vos foda.
E de igual modo, já me começa a parecer que o Sr. Primeiro-Ministro tem um atraso mental e que a Ministra das Finanças é uma cadela satânica.
Estou a falar contigo, ó banqueiro Mardolas. Além de vir para cá roubar o povo português e da casa crica, é? Eu bem vi, hein?
Eu peço desculpa, mas o nosso Luizinho hoje está impagável. A crica. Ainda para mais à frente da Sra. Ministra das Finanças, que é uma mulher de classe e não há nada de se deitar fora. Enfim.
Toxic masculinity clouds the room, but where behind closed doors the male characters are in a position of power, objectifying the woman and making somewhat a mockery out of the country's debt, their power is undermined and used to humiliate them outdoors. A magical sorcerer approaches them and comments on their
Immobile depuis
locality.
qu'il occupe ce poste dans la Banque Centrale Européenne. En mélancolique, dis-moi la vérité. Il bouge pas ton zizi.
He offers them
J'ai
a
la solution. L'antidote magique. Ça va vous faire bander. L'érection est garantie à n'importe quel moment de la journée ou de la nuit.
At first a blessing, this soon becomes a curse as it humiliates the man and gives him physical pain.
Esse tesão animal está inclusive machucando o meu rim.
And what if it never returns to normal?
E se minha piroca ficar assim para sempre?
The symbol of the phallus is thus turned on its head, showing their stupidity and easy manipulation as the sorcerer cons them out of money.
Para cumprir o plano de ajustamento, ao contrário do que tem vindo a ser afirmado pelos chefes de missão do FMI, BCE e Comissão Europeia,
Portugal's strong appearance patriarchy is torn down once again.
A informação que agora nos chega revela que houve volte-face e que a Troika está então disposta a aceitar valor bem mais elevado para o déficit deste ano.
Where the unanimous labelling of the 2008 financial collapse as crisis opened up opportunity for self-reflection, Gomes rises to the challenge by trying to represent not just the current crisis, but the process of self-reflection itself. This proves to be an overwhelming burden and anxiety-inducing, especially in Arabian Nights, as Tabu's roaring film festival success puts pressure on Gomes as an auteur and the country's moral conscience. But where the issues at stake are so close to home for Gomes, docufiction and intertextuality are necessary to help create an alienated gaze and distance through abstraction. In this way, he invites a critical engagement with his protagonists and Portugal's patriarchy through lack, saudade, juxtapositions, and the failures and hypocrisies of his characters. Despite the polemic reactions to Gomes' films criticising a political absence, whilst applauding genius cinematography, he manages to paint a nuanced account of Portugal's hyper-identity problem, the state of being and not being. His pessimistic depiction of modern Portugal is haunted by the past, unable to shake colonialism and Salazarism, which is best exemplified through his male characters. The desire of escape through fiction becomes undesirable, always leading back to crisis. Portuguese modernity in Gomes' films, therefore, becomes overwhelmingly complicated to analyse and pin down. Ferreira suggests to abandon the notion of modernity altogether here and use the films rather as a didactical tool for historiography, in that we can learn about the writing and telling of histories. And in this sense, it may be more useful to use our methods of critical engagement with Gomes' films as a framework to assess historiography depicted in other films in Western cultures.